Hello everyone. Today I'll be looking at the process of buying a house in UK. So this is based on my personal experience in the last 12 years. I've done this a few times. Bought a house three times. So first I bought a house, we sold it, we moved to another area, bought another house, sold it again, and moved to the third house that we are in when we bought it. So I've gone through this process a few times. So based on my personal experience, I'll share with you what I know about buying a house in UK. So the first thing I'll try and do like a mini comparison between people for India. Try and do a mini comparison here and then between the process of buying a house in UK and process of buying a house in India. So that will kind of give you something to compare against. Now, the first thing that when you come to buy a property in UK, the one word that or one option that you will see is there are two types of properties in UK: freehold versus leasehold. Now, the concept of leasehold is there in India as well, but it's slightly different. The lease options in India are more like a long term rent. So it's like a 2 year, 5 year, 10 year rent where you pay an upfront rental amount for a 5 year period. And that's kind of what a leasehold or a lease option in India is. In UK, it's slightly different. The houses are sold as either a freehold or a leasehold. But in both the cases, you're basically buying the property. So generally, the apartments, the flats are sold as leasehold, where you agree that the lease period is for 99 years, and you agree to pay a small, very small ground rental or a maintenance fees to the owner of the property. But you are basically the registered owner of the property. To the person that's selling it or the person who's maintaining that group of apartments, you will be paying a small ground rental. So there will be a small amount on top of the mortgage that you will be paying. And plus, when you have to renew, so if you buy it for instead of 19 years, if you buy it for 20 years, 30-year period, the renewal for the next 19 years is a very small amount. It's not as if you have to buy the property entirely again. So that's what a leasehold is. Still, it's buying the property. It's technically the property is yours, but you're paying a very small portion of very small ground rental or a maintenance fees on top of your mortgage amounts. In freehold, the entire property is yours, including the ground. So you do not paying any rent or you're not paying any maintenance or anything. Basically, the property is yours. There's nothing more, no hidden charges to pay on top of it, except if it's part of a big communal group of houses, like 50 houses or 60 houses, and it's maintained by a central agency for cleaning and for parking charges or whatever it is. They might charge you a small additional fees, but that's not because it's a freehold or a leasehold. It's just because there is a maintenance that comes with that property. Generally, for new builds, there will be a small maintenance option that comes along with it, even if it's a freehold or a leasehold. The next thing is with regards to buying a new property versus a second-hand property. So in India, there is still a taboo about buying second-hand property. Most people prefer to go and buy a new property because one, in these days, there is a lot of options available. A lot of builders are building new properties, and there's more attractive options available for newer properties. And people generally tend to go and buy a newer property than the concept of buying a land, building a house, or buying a second-hand house is like it's a bit rare in India, but in UK it's kind of common. Whether you're buying an old property or a new property, there's not much difference. It is all about buying in the right location, being able to afford the property. But some people do prefer, I want a new property, but there are a lot of people who actually prefer Victorian style houses, old style houses built in the 1900. So there are people who actually prefer to buy an old property as well. In fact, it kind of gets advertised as well as a Victorian house, as an old house. So there is a lot of attraction for older houses as well in UK. So the main search criteria for buying a house is the location. So in my cost of living guide itself, I've kind of given an overview of the London zones, of the places and where the houses are priced higher and prices priced lower. So generally, in and around London, if you take it's the commutable areas, if it's nearer to the tube station, if it's near to the metro station, near to the bus stop, how far it is from central London, how easily commutable it is to central London. Those are kind of the key search criteria. And plus, if you're married and if you're going to have kids, or if you have kids, then the biggest search criteria is obviously the schools, because in one of my school videos I explained that the concept of free schools in UK, every school is free. So the government schools, to get a place in the school that's based on the catchment area, and so people will want to buy a house within the catchment area of a school. So there's both for primary school and secondary school, the catchment areas will generally apply, and so people would tend to actually search for houses based on the schools. In fact, one of the reasons we moved houses is also because of the schools mainly. If you take in India, the house prices in one particular area based on the facilities that the builder is offering will tend to kind of stay in the same range. Like, if the per square feet rate, if you take one area, it kind of, if a 2-bedroom house is selling for 50 lakhs, more or less the other apartments will also be selling at 50 lakhs from the other builders, depending on the facilities, like, if they have gym and swimming pool and everything else, but it will be a little bit higher or lower. But if you could do an apples to apple comparison of the same property type, same facilities, the rates will kind of remain the same in the area unless until you move to a different area altogether. But in UK, the property prices can significantly differ based on a lot of criteria in the same neighborhood or in the same locality. For example, when we bought our first house in UK, in Feltham, we bought it for around 230,000. Roughly, it equates to 2.3 crores in India. That was a 3-bedroom property, 3-bedroom house, a freehold house. In the same locality in the Hounslow Council itself, in about 2 to 3 miles, roughly about 8 to 10 minutes drive, in the same road, studio apartments were selling for 250,000 pounds, almost 2.5 crores. So a 3-bedroom house was comparatively cheaper to a studio apartment on the same road in a span of 10 minutes drive. So a lot of factors determine the cost. So like I said, the accessibility to the tube station, the schools in that area, and so many other things basically determine what is the cost. So for searching a property, there are 2 major websites in UK. It's Rightmove and Zoopla. So both the websites will pretty much have 100% of all of the properties that get listed for sale in UK, and you can search using any one of these websites. And both of these search websites, they have the option to find out the nearest school, the nearest tube, the nearest commuting location, commuting option basically. So all of these options are visible in both of these websites. In both of these, the search criteria you can set based on all of these parameters. So the lowest amount that you can buy a house in UK is approximately, I would say, is about 150,000 pounds if you go about 2 or 3 hours away from London. So London is basically the most costliest in entire UK. So the more you go away and away from London, say about 2 or 3 hours away from London, pretty much to the north, you'll find the houses become cheaper. Sometimes to the south, the prices are a bit more expensive because there are areas like Kent where the schools are really good, and Buckinghamshire, the schools are really good. So the house prices are a little bit expensive even though they are going away and away from London. So if you go to the north, there are places where you can buy a house, you can buy a 2-bedroom house for like 150,000. It's like a 1.5 crores in India. So that's like the 150 to 200,000 is an average price. If you take the entire country, that's kind of the average price of a house in UK. So even in my cost of living, I did tell you that cost of living in UK and cost of living in London is different. Same way, the London house prices are significantly different from the general UK house prices. Now, if you take the zone 1 and 2, a simple 1-bedroom or a studio apartment can be as high as 500,000 pounds, almost up to 5 crores just for a studio apartment or a 1-bedroom house, 1-bedroom flat in central London. So as and when you come out of the zone 1 and zone 2, when you come into the zone 3, it becomes a little bit more affordable. And when you come into the zone 4, that's kind of where people tend to buy properties if they're working in London. And there you can kind of buy properties in the range of 250 to 300,000. Those are kind of the starting prices for a 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom houses. And the more that you go outside of the zones like zone 5 and zone 6, it becomes a bit cheaper depending upon all of the other criteria that I explained already. So if you see these few examples, you will see that in the same locality, studio apartments are priced at 250,000, but at the same time you can get a two bedroom apartment for a bit cheaper than that. So it all depends on what your needs are and whether you want to really be based near a commutable location, or you're prepared to walk for 10 minutes to the station every day, but you really want a bigger house like a two bedroom house. So it depends on what your needs are, pretty much like in India. I mean, you can choose between those kind of property, but the price difference here is significantly higher just because the property prices are itself significantly higher. The biggest difference between UK and India from a search perspective is the concept of estate agents. Now, 90% or more than 95% of the properties sold here are sold by the estate agent. So, it's a glorified broker, but the fact is that they have an established office. They're very well reputed in terms of their profession, and most of the sellers they trust the estate agent and they advertise through the estate agent, and the estate agent actually is the one who's putting up the advertisement or putting up the property for sale in the website, in the Rightmove or the Zoopla property websites. And you will basically talk to the estate agent. You'll be hidden from the actual seller for the time that you are actually going to buy the property. Till that point of time, you will not be allowed to talk to the seller directly. You will be talking to the estate agent. So the estate agent will be the one who will show you around the property. He'll be the one you will call up and you will be discussing about the property with in the first place. So when someone wants to sell the property, they'll basically call the estate agent. They'll come home, take photographs, they'll do a map of the house, they'll do a floor plan of the house, and then they'll discuss the price with the owner of the property, saying how much they want to sell it for. And once they've agreed it, that's the price that they will put on the website, saying that this is on offer for this price. Now that's the asking price. So this has been agreed with the owner, and finally they've said this is the asking price. More or less, the estate agent will give a guideline to say that this is the prices that houses are selling in this region. And so it will probably be a little bit accurate, but in some cases the owner could say that I want to price it a little bit higher because I want to wait and see. I know there is a demand in this region, so I want to price it a little bit higher. So that is the asking price. Now, the first thing that you will see is when you've seen the property and you like the property, the first thing that you need to do is put an offer for the property. So this is called the offer price. Now, you could have a house that is on the market for 250,000. Not necessary that you had to put an offer for 250,000. You could start with any price as an offer price. And generally, the advice is that if there is not too much of a competition in that area, you start with a lower price. In fact, there is no guideline as to how much lower you can go. The very first property that we bought, we in fact quoted an offer price or asking price. Against the asking price, we quoted an offer which was significantly lower, about 30 or 40,000. Eventually, the estate agent has to take your offer and go back to the buyer and discuss and come back and say that, no, this offer has not been accepted. So we went back 3 or 4 times and eventually we got the property for about £10,000 cheaper than the advertised offer price. So bargain a lot on the offer price. There's no harm in attempting to get a lower price by putting an offer which is lower than the asking price, unless and until the estate agent is very clear that he is not going to accept the offer because there is a standing instruction. Generally, the estate agents will take down your offer price, put it on your file, go back to the buyer and come back to say that is accepted or not accepted, or they are willing to discuss. So you will get a guideline as to whether or not the buyer is willing to negotiate. In fact, when I made this video in Tamil, I got a couple of comments within a week where people were in the process of buying the house and they got, based on this video that I had made in Tamil, they had actually put an offer price and they got it much lesser than the asking price. So one of them in fact said that they had got the property for almost £16,000 less than the asking price, and they were not actually going to put a lower price offer because they were not aware of it. After watching the video, they came back and actually gave me a mail saying that thanks for suggesting that you can actually go for a lower price asking offer. Now this can work the other way also. So for example, if a house is on the market for 250,000 and there are 5 or 6 people who actually like it, they can start putting offers higher than the asking price as well. So when you put in an offer, the estate agent will tell you there is already a person who's put it at 250,000. So you will want to increase your offer to say 252, and then it goes up. It can keep going up 10,000, 20,000 pounds higher as well. But that's when at some point you need to basically stop, because it becomes like an auction where you're competing with another buyer and you are escalating or increasing the price unnecessarily. So next comes the mortgage affordability. So the home loan in UK is called as a mortgage. So typically you will need about a minimum of 5% deposit, but the higher deposit amount that you can arrange for the property, then the better interest rates that you will get from the banks for your mortgage. This is called as a loan to value or LTV. Now, if you can get 10%, your interest rates will come down. If you can go up to 20%, once you breach the 20% deposit mark, the interest rates can be really low. In fact, you can get in UK, you can get interest rates like 1%, 1.2% also. I got an offer of 1.2% interest rate once. The mortgages can be really cheap in that aspect. But if you're a first time buyer, if you're buying a property for the first time, and if you have only 5% deposit or 10% deposit, it could be slightly higher, but you could still get like 3 to 4%, 4% mortgage, 4% interest mortgage. This is significantly cheaper when compared to India, where the mortgage rates can be like 7%, 10% interest rates. So what is the affordability? So generally, what is your eligibility is based on your annual salary. So if you're, it's about 4 to 4.5 times your annual salary. So if your annual salary is about 50,000 pounds, then they'll tend to give you a loan up to 200,000 pounds on a maximum basis. Some banks will probably give you a little bit more, but that's kind of the guidelines. 4 to 5 times annual salary is kind of the guideline, and most banks would tend not to go over that limit unless and until there are exceptional circumstances. Now, if both of you are working, if you're husband and wife and both of you are working, then generally the property is bought as a joint property for partners, for husband and wife, and they'll consider your annual salary of both the parties, and the 4 to 5 times is applied on the total combined salary of the husband and wife. I would have talked about credit history in some of my previous videos. So credit history is very important when you go for your mortgage. Now, if you've never had a loan, or if you never had a credit card or mobile phone on contract, then you may not have a credit history. And it's not a good thing, because not having a credit history against having a slightly bad credit history is actually even worse, because if you don't have any credit history at all, the bank has no clue whether or not you will repay, or whether you have the ability to repay or not. So what you need to do, if you're thinking about buying a mortgage or if thinking about buying a house, you need to start building up your credit history. So the first thing that you need to do is you need to get a mobile phone on contract. So like a 12-month, 18-month contract, and start paying for your mobile phone on a monthly basis. This is like a monthly plan for your mobile phone. Again, the best thing to do is get a credit card, spend a small amount, 200, 300 pounds, and repay it in full for about 3 or 4 months. And that will start building up your credit history, and you'll get a good credit history by doing that. Now, if you're on a really good salary and you're going for a property that is not that high and everything is working out in your favor, you can directly go to the bank. You can contact the bank either online or direct, go to the bank, and you might end up getting a good mortgage deal. But generally, if you go to the bank, the mortgage rates that you will get are not that favorable or not that good against going to a mortgage advisor. So a mortgage advisor is again like a broker for the mortgage, but there are two types of mortgage advisors. One is an independent mortgage advisor, another is a tied mortgage advisor. A tied mortgage advisor is someone who will get a commission from the bank for the mortgage that they're going to get you. So if you're getting a 200,000 property, 200,000 pounds mortgage, they might get a 2% mortgage, 2% commission from the bank, which is their fees basically. So they won't charge you. They are tied to a bank, or they're tied to certain institutions. But the problem there is they will only give you certain rates, and it may not be fully competitive. So the other option is an independent mortgage advisor, who basically have access to the whole market, and they can get you the best deal, but you might need to pay a small fees like 300 to 400 pounds. It could vary, but you might need to pay a small fees, but that fees will be really worth the rate or the option that they can get you in terms of a mortgage offer. In fact, when I had tried to get a mortgage offer, the rate I was getting from the bank was significantly higher than the rate that the mortgage advisor was able to get from the same bank through his contacts, and it was comparatively much cheaper. I was in fact making the 300-400 pounds in just 1 month in the interest difference alone. So I would always advise to go for a mortgage advisor and just at least consult with the mortgage advisor, look at the rate comparison and see which is best for you. Now, touching on the topic of mortgages and buying a house, there are a lot of help options available from the government. In fact, I had even posted a video about the help to buy ISA. Now, there are a lot of other help to buy options also available, but that's quite an exhaustive topic. So we will talk about the government options supporting first-time buyers, mainly about buying a property later. We'll just talk about the generic process of buying a property in this video. So what's the total average time for completing the purchase of a property? So on an average, from the time that you've seen the property on the market, making an offer and everything, and just finally getting the keys and going into the house, it could take anywhere between 6 weeks to 6 months. Now 6 weeks is quite a fast moving target. So if you're able to complete your entire property purchase in 6 weeks, that's quite fast. On an average, it could take anywhere between 6 weeks to 6 months. I mean, expect 2 months as a rough average to say that it's a normal process would take about 2 months to complete. So what is this process that takes 2 months? So the first thing that you need to find once your offer has been accepted is a solicitor. A solicitor is basically a special legal representative that's going to represent you for this house purchase. So you will have a solicitor who will legally represent you, and the owner of the property, the buyer of the property, or the seller of the property will also have a solicitor who represents them. So you will basically talk to the buyer, talk to the seller through the solicitor and the estate agent. You will never talk to the seller independently on your own. This is to safeguard you, making sure that everything gets documented, everything goes through a legal procedure. The reason this is done is because the money is exchanged through the solicitors, and they are legally bound to complete the transaction. They're legally bound to give you the keys and make sure that everything is done. Now, there was once a scenario where the seller was not willing to get a solicitor. They were trying to complete the sale on their own, and everybody from my solicitor to the estate agent advised against it, because when the money goes into the seller's hand, there's no legal obligation for the seller to complete the sale. They could just retain the property and run away with the money, and then it will be a long-winded legal process for you to follow up. So always make sure that you have a solicitor and the seller also has a solicitor, and the dealing is between the solicitors and not directly between you and the seller. So once you have a solicitor to represent you, you also need to remember that solicitors fees will be around, roughly around 2,000 to 3,000 pounds. That's another cost to factor into buying a property. So you will have the solicitor fees, you will have the mortgage deposit, and there's another big element that you need to consider, which is the stamp duty of the property. So the stamp duty of the property is like a registration fees in India. So if you're a first-time buyer, the government has given you a good benefit. So if you've not bought a property anywhere in UK or in the world, then you have a benefit that the government gives you, which is basically if the property value is up to 500,000 pounds, then for the first 300,000 pounds, you will not have to pay any stamp duty. And for the remaining amount, if the property is higher than 300,000 pounds, then for the remaining amount, you'll pay a small stamp duty of 5%. So for example, if your property value is 250,000 pounds, you'll pay zero stamp duty. You'll have to pay no stamp duty if you're a first-time buyer. If the property value is, let's say, 400,000 pounds, for the 100,000 pounds, 300,000 to 400,000, for that 100,000 pounds, you'll buy a 5% stamp duty, which is about 5,000 pounds. If the property value is higher than £500,000, even if you're a first time buyer, or if you're buying a second property in UK or anywhere else. If it's not your first time if you're not a first time buyer, then there's no benefit as a first time buyer. You will have to pay in the slabs that are applicable to you for any property. So that's like for the first £125,000, there is no stamp duty. Then from the £125,000 to £250,000, it's 2%. 250,000 to from 250,000 onwards, it goes up to 5% till a value of about 950,000. So you kind of pay on an average 2% for the 125,000 between 125 and 250, and then 5% on an average. So if you are roughly buying a property for let's say 400,000, you'll end up paying close to about £10,000 in a stamp duty. So the effective rate is about 2.5%. So that's your stamp duty slabs explained for you. And if you're buying a second property in UK retaining the first property, then you'll pay a 3% additional stamp duty for every slab. So you get no benefit for the 0 to £125,000. You'll get 3%, and then again 5% and 8% and so on. So you'll pay 3% in addition to the normal stamp duty that everyone else will. So I explained that the whole process takes about 6 weeks to 6 months, right? So what happens in the 6 weeks to 6 months? So the minute that you put in the offer price and you find a solicitor, you start exchanging or you start discussing contracts, and you start discussing all of the legal terms and conditions. So the solicitor will then start to do all these searches for you. There are various searches, about 20 different searches that the solicitor will do. Right from the environment search to the drainage search to the local council search. There are so many things that they have to do. The bank will then do a valuation whether or not the property that you're buying is worth the amount that you're getting the mortgage for. Now, if it's a really old, if it's a new property, they don't need to do a full structural survey. But if it's an older property, like older than 10 years or so, they will also have to do a full structural survey. Sometimes you need to pay for the full structural survey, which could be up to £1,000. So the full structural survey basically telling you the property is structurally sound. If it had any subsidence, if there was subsidence, then there needs to be an underpinning of the property. If there was flooding, then there needs to be proper measures that have been taken against flooding for the property. So there are so many things that the structural survey would need to do to clear the property is safe to buy and safe to give a mortgage for. So you don't need to worry about it, because your solicitor will be informing you of all the searches that are happening, and will also be telling you if you need to do any further structural surveys, if the initial surveys are turning up with any information that you need to be concerned about. Your solicitor will be giving you an advice. So it's always good to go for a good solicitor, even if the fees is a few £100 higher than the one that you can find on the market. So the big question is, renting versus buying. In India, if you are going to rent a property, significantly cheaper against buying a property, because if you're in a 2-bedroom house, for example, right, in places that I've been in Chennai and some of the South Indian metros, except for big cities like Mumbai, the rents are comparatively cheaper. Like even with swimming pool and gym and everything, you can get like 15,000 rupees. You can get a 3-bedroom house. But if you were to buy the same 3-bedroom flat in that same area, you will end up paying a mortgage of about 60,000-70,000 rupees per month. So the rent versus mortgage in home loan in India is comparatively much higher. In fact, mortgages are much expensive than rents. But in UK, it's the other way around. Your mortgage premium, or the monthly mortgage amount that you will pay, because the interest rates are very low, will almost be comparable to the rent you're paying. In fact, in Hounslow, the example that I gave you, where we bought a 3-bedroom house, we were paying a rent of close to £1,300. For similar kind of property in the same area, when I actually afforded the 10% down payment and bought the property, the rent was £1,100. The mortgage was £1,100. It was £200 cheaper than the rent that I was paying. Plus, the rents keep increasing on a year-on-year basis. When we moved into Hounslow, 9 or 10 years back, it was £950, £900. you could get a 2 bedroom flat for rent. In over a span of 3-4 years, it almost jumped to 1,200 pounds. It keeps going up from a rental value perspective. But mortgages, on the other hand, you can try and reduce the cost overall, because the interest rates tend to get cheaper, like I said, when you go in for the second year, third year, fourth year. So interest rates can become cheaper when you do a remortgage after the fixed period. So effectively, once all the searches are done, once all of the agreed things have been agreed, and once you have the mortgage agreed, so you will do what is called as an exchange of contract. During the exchange of contract, you will also agree on a completion date. Now, till the point that you have exchanged contracts, while all of this process is going on, you can still pull out. There will be only a very small fees that you may need to pay to your solicitor or whoever, but you are not legally bound to buy the property. But once you have exchanged the contract, even though the amount hasn't been transferred, you can't back out. There'll be a significant fees involved, a penalty involved, if you try to back out after exchanging contract. So you have till that point of exchanging the contracts to finally decide that I'm going to go ahead with the buying of this house. Now, when you exchange, you agree that this is the completion date. That's the date that I'll get the money, or that the day I'll get the keys for the property. So on the completion day, the day of the morning, the solicitor will call you and ask you for confirmation. Once you've confirmed, they'll talk to the bank. The bank will release the mortgage amount to the solicitor, to your solicitor, and your solicitor will then transfer the money to the seller's solicitor. And the seller solicitor will decide if there is a home loan of a seller that needs to be repaid. They will repay it, and then they will instruct the seller that they've got the money. Then the seller will then instruct the estate agent to release the keys, and then you will go and collect the keys from the estate agent. So it's kind of a cyclical process. That's how it works on the day of completion, and that's the end-to-end house buying process in UK. So I kind of made it a bit comprehensive and exhaustive, but at the same time tried to keep it at a summary level on some of the topics like house purchase, help options from the government. So hopefully this has been useful for people watching it. Put in a lot of effort collecting this information, making this video. So appreciate if you could leave your comments. Also subscribe and share with your friends who are looking for similar information or new to UK. Thank you.